Hello and welcome to a new Geektown Behind the Scenes podcast. I'm your host Dave Elliot, and this week I'm chatting with Laurent Spillemaecker, VFX supervisor for the VFX company Folks, about his work on the fourth and final season of the Netflix hit show The Umbrella Academy. The final season sees our dysfunctional family of heroes once again trying to avert yet another apocalypse. Warning, there are spoilers in this upcoming intro and in the interview itself, so if you haven't watched the final season, go and watch it right now. Still here? Okay, so if you remember the end of season 3, the gang were left in a new reality, but also powerless. Whilst trying to find a way to get their powers back, they also discover that they are the problem. After various Umbrella Academy type things happen, Ben and his new girlfriend Jen end up merging into a giant blob monster that threatens to destroy the Earth. And that's where Laurent and his team at Folks come in. Folks have been involved with the Umbrella Academy since season 1, but for the final season, the team received its most significant mandate yet. They were responsible for conceptual pre-production work to establish the creature's identity, post-viz, final elaboration of complex shots, and creation of character and environment assets, animation, simulation, and compositing. Along with creating the monstrous version of Ben and Jen, they also enhanced the environment for a Christmas theme sequence, adding crowd characters, vendors, snow, and a whole lot more. Plus, they picked up a few other shots as well, such as Five's blinking, some of the laser eyes effects, some other superpowers and background work and other bits and pieces as well. Outside of the Umbrella Academy, Laurent has worked on a huge range of projects, including Sin City, 300, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Blade Runner 2049, Thor Ragnarok, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and a whole lot more as well. If you'd like to hear more behind-the-scenes interviews, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast by searching for Geektown Radio. This will also give you our weekly Geektown Radio podcast, which brings you all the latest TV, film, and gaming news. You can also go to the website at geektown.co.uk for daily news stories and all the latest UK and US TV premiere dates. Here's the interview with Laurent Spillemaecker, VFX supervisor for Folks, on the Umbrella Academy. Thank you for coming on and chatting with me a bit about your work, particularly on the Umbrella Academy. That's mainly what we're sort of on to talk about, but touch on some of the other stuff as well. Before we get on to talking about the Umbrella Academy, a little bit of background about you. How did you get into the VFX industry in the first place?
By accident.
It's not surprising, the amount of people that fall into these sort of things.
Yeah, I think it's a recurring thing. I think when I started, I was in France. I was in Paris, actually. And I was an engineer. And although I really like studying, I hated my job when I started. And then I thought one of my best friends was doing visual effects for commercials. It seems to be having so much fun. And it was like, this is kind of unfair. Why is he having so much fun? And I'm like so bored in my work. Long story short, I decided to try that. I've always been interested into Photoshop, computers, drawing. I've been drawing all my life. And eventually I started as a flame artist in commercials. After a few years in commercials, I decided that, commercials is not really my thing. I wanted to do some feature, but feature was not a strong field in Paris at that time.
Right.
It was early 2000s. And this is why I decided to move somewhere and start, looking for places where feature film was a bigger thing. And I eventually arrived in Canada, in Quebec.
Yeah.
I think I landed here like 20 years ago, actually, 2004.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense to go to Quebec, given your French background. So it's a good place to start. From there, I mean, you've worked on a whole bunch of different things, which we'll touch on in a bit. But I mean, the main thing you've been working on recently is Umbrella Academy. How did you end up starting on that? Because folks have been on it since season 1, haven't they?
Yes. Folks started really slowly on season 1. We never worked with that specific client before. And they asked us to do some very simple stuff to start with. But yet, I think it was really helping their storytelling. They shot a bunch of sequences in Toronto, and it was supposed to be something like spring or something. But as you know, winter is pretty long in Canada, and they were shooting some like in April, and there was like no leaves at all in the trees, which for an American audience or anywhere else in the world looks like winter, dead winter.
Yeah.
So we ended up putting leaves in the trees everywhere. I think it was a bunch of shots and not necessarily very complicated, but continuity, it needed to be absolutely seamless and all. So we started, by small things, and then they realized that we're like pretty okay doing the job. And then slowly but surely we grew up on we got more awards, bigger chunks. And by the end, by season 4, we're the main vendor.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating show, I'm sure, from a visual effects to work on, because it is a fairly effects-heavy show. But there is also this interesting mix of what I would call obvious effects and hidden effects as well going on there. So with season 4 specifically, that being the latest season and the final season, do you just want to talk a little bit about the work that you did on that? Anything particularly tricky or fun or memorable from the 4th season?
So as opposed to our first introduction with the series, like invisible visual effects, like adding leaves and trees, what we did for season 4 was most like the obvious thing that, of course, you cannot shoot that, like a giant monster destroying a city.
Yeah.
So this is what we did for season 4. We developed full CG characters, 3 of them, talking, doing lots of action, and not only just fighting and destroying things, but also emotions. And so they're quite complex characters to animate and give to life. So we did Ben when he's like in his advanced stage of disease, Jennifer, his lover, in the same stage of very advanced disease. And eventually we did the morph when at some point in the show, they blend together into one creature that we called Bennifer, Bennifer, and that's that weird slimy creature, a little Akira kind of thing.
Yeah,
that just absorbs energy and just keeps on growing and eventually destroys the whole world.
Where do you start coming up with that sort of character? What sort of directions are you getting and discussions are you having to develop that?
Well, the good thing is we've established a really close relationship with Netflix and the creative at Netflix and the overall VFX supervisor at Laurent. So we were involved really, really early in the process. So we had a lot of time to just start on sketches and concepts and the whole conversation. Because when you're reading the scripts, we had like the initial scripts in hand, and it's like, okay, so we have 2 people merging together, and then that blob expands and takes over buildings, and then he becomes 100 feet tall, and is like, okay, how do we do that? So we went into like a really like concept frenzy, and we had many of our artists trying different things. And our approach was to do a very, very fast iteration process, because the idea was really wide and we needed to narrow the idea. So we concept 100 things is completely different, just to guide and said, okay, no, not this. We like that kind of silhouette here. We like that texture there. And eventually we went, closer. It's like golfing, right? You start from really wide, and then eventually you get on the green, and then there's like, okay. And once we get like a much more general idea of where we want it to be, we went into like actual 3D sculpting and stuff like that, even though we used a lot of 3D in our concepts to start with, because it was not just only still images. All the conversation were also, okay, how does that thing move? How does that thing absorb people? Do they melt? Of course, there was the elephant in the room. Even though it's Netflix, they say, we cannot make it look like Stranger Things. It's not happening.
Of course, yeah.
So there's no way that creature, the people, the victims are going to melt and merge into that same thing. That's Stranger Things. So it's not what we want to do. So we had a bunch of references. The 2 main references I think we looked into were like an homage to John Carpenter's The Thing, and also Akira, the famous Japanese anime, where, that sort of uncontrolled giant ball of flesh just expanding and eventually absorbing everything and killing people. Because at the very end, our giant creature eventually melts into a blob. That's its final stage of evolution in a way. And it's not even a creature anymore. It's a living form. It's a blob that has its own conscious, its own motivation, but it's just, form of mesh, liquid flesh thing.
It's a wonderful and very Umbrella Academy way to end that show, because I've loved that series from the beginning, and I really like that it ends on that sort of bittersweet kind of thing of it enveloping everybody. It's just exactly the way that show should have gone out, and the creature comes across, I think, really, really well. And you talk about sort of there are points where Ben and Jennifer are absorbed, but they're having conversations, so that's obviously CGI. What are you using for reference for that? Have you actually sort of been and scanned the actors to get them into the computer?
Yeah, so the how, to answer your how question, yes, of course we have the actors scanned and relying on heavy particle simulation and all. But as of visual references, we did not really have any. So again, we tried a bunch of things. It's as soon as, melting again, don't look too much like Stranger Things. Or it's okay to pay an homage to The Thing or Akira. So it's a blend of, and it's coming from, one is an anime, a manga, one is another TV show. And then we came up with our own solutions as well, our own suggestions. We looked at hundreds of reference of liquids experiments of, there's so many YouTube videos out there of people just trying to mix different things, chemical reactions of people mixing weird stuff, and you see like things expanding and then it looks like and so we looked at that and trying to mimic it, and eventually brings you to a place where you think, oh, it's cool, but now we want to direct that. And it's like, okay, this a little more, this a little less. And I think this is where the VFX gets tricky, and it's having control over what you're doing. It's people speak a lot about AI these days, and it's very impressive. But in VFX, we want pixel level control on everything. I love this, but I want this drop to come 10 frames later or something. And to have that level of control, you need to be in a very empirical and a very organized environment.
That sequence, I think, comes across brilliantly for the end of the show. I really like what you came up with for that.
Thank you.
Outside of sort of creating the sort of giant finale monster, what are some of the other bits and pieces that you did for season 4?
I think episode 6, like the ending, was most of our award. Like the CG creatures, Ben, Jen, Bennifer in various stages, and the blob at the end, the very end, was most of our award. We also did a few other things, but much smaller in other episodes. We did some lasers from Lila has laser superpowers.
Right, yeah.
We did a Christmas village. At some point, they go in a Christmas village. Again, Mother Nature decided that winter in Toronto will have no snow. So global warming is not a thing, as we know. So we had to add a bunch of snow and extend that that practical set, and add more, people, crowd, a little bit of some selling kiosks of selling stuff like a Christmas market, So, and then there's a fight happening in that where like they shoot on it. There's many hidden agents and they start shooting each other. So we work on that sequence as well. A few extensions of each time we see the Academy building in this time frame. Luther lives in a very abandoned version of the Academy building. And it's all, crippled and rusty and all, So we did that, all the street view of the Academy.
Right, yeah. As I said, folks have been on it since season 1. I mean, I know your work's grown over the seasons, but if you're looking across all the seasons outside of the monster stuff that you've just mentioned, do you have a favorite obvious effect that you did across all the seasons and a favorite sort of hidden effect that you did across the seasons?
Interesting. Well, of course, I loved doing the monsters in last season, but in previous seasons, we did a bunch of very various things. Like Season 3, we did all the ravens, all the birds coming from Faye.
Yes.
That was nice because it was, of course, you imagine that it's not real, but they needed to look as real as possible, these birds. And then we did something that it's completely magical. We did that Kugelblitz. And so that weird, again, like super nuclear core that is expanding and eating people. We did that. And then it's, of course, it's more magic and it pulses, it creates shock waves and destroys like a wider radius of cities and each time. So we did that. That was a lot of fun. Bunch of superpowers. When Five blinks from place to place, we did a lot of that. We did also that funny character. Remember that Christopher, a cube, was a talking cube?
Yes.
So it's a first time we I think it was season 2 or 3, I don't remember. And Netflix says, okay, they say, oh, you will do a character. Like, oh yes, finally we want to do a character. It's a cube. Okay. But it ended up being really, really funny. And then after that, we made many more, like the birds and the Kugelblitz and others.
Yeah. The earlier seasons, somebody got to do a monkey and you get to do a cube.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, thank you so much. But no, yeah, really nice. And in terms of like more invisible stuff, we did a lot of city extensions in season 2, I believe, when they're in Dallas in the 60s.
Yes.
And everything revolves around the assassination of JFK and all that on Delhi Plaza and all that stuff. So very, very sensitive subject for Americans and all the conspiracy around it. It's funny. We looked at so many references in books and all about what it was looking like at that time. And there are like some Easter bunnies, Edens everywhere, and where we put, the shooter, as well, and stuff like that. Anyway, so that was nice because many of these are completely invisible. I hope. I hope they are. And but it was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I mean, that's something like that is quite tricky because presumably it wasn't shot in Dallas either. So you're having
some of it, maybe just a few shots on the plaza itself, but the plaza has changed so much since the 60s. Yeah. But the rest, no, all the surrounding streets that were shot in somewhere in Canada.
Yeah. So there's quite a lot of work with something like that. One question I wanted to ask was, there's a reason I asked this, because I remember talking to one FX person who ended up, I think it was the position of a mirror on a back wall, which they had to move from one side to the other. I think it was on a Disney show. And it's one of those things that it was an effect that they were told they had to do for continuity, but nobody will ever notice and probably wouldn't have noticed looking at it. So my question is there something which was an annoying little special effect that you had to do that was invisible and you're like, nobody's going to notice this? Why are we doing
But why do we do that? Yeah. I'd be honest, not that much, because that's what I really, really love about TV shows and working with Netflix, as opposed to my past experiences in feature, where you will like do a lot of work like you described with nobody will even notice. And I think on TV shows, they're looking for put their money where it counts. Right? Yeah. And I think it requires a vision. So they really picked up battles. And so there were really, really few of that. Of course, there's always a little bit of a few mistakes on set or a small continuity things, but it wasn't like never like a major thing like I've experienced in feature film before.
Yeah. Before we move off the Umbrella Academy stuff, do you have a particular favorite character from the show? Because I mean, I find it very difficult to pick out of the main group. Is there anyone that you particularly...
Yeah, I think I have a little crush for Five. Such a weird character. He's an old dude in a boy's body. He's so weird. He's clever. He's a total nerd. He's a geek completely. And I think I like Five.
Yeah, Five is great, but I find it very difficult to pick because I think Klaus is wonderful. Luther's fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Klaus is. I mean, the actors are all brilliant. I've interviewed Tom and Emmy, and we've done things with Robert as well. They're all just such lovely people, so it's always really nice. And I really like how they handled the stuff with Elliot as well, because it's one of those things with this show, you kind of wondered how they were going to handle that transition, and I love that they just put it in the story and everybody went cool and just carried on.
Yeah. I think they
beautiful.
It was a clever thing to do. It's like it's almost like a non-event. It's like, okay, cool. Then move on.
Yeah, I think that was absolutely the perfect way to deal with it, because there were so many other things you can do when you're changing realities and stuff, and I wonder whether they'd do something with that, and I love the fact that they didn't, and they just carried straight through. But yeah, it's been a great cast and a wonderful show, and I will miss it. I mean, some of the other stuff you've worked on outside of that, Sin City, Snakes on a Plane, 300, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, some of the Twilight films, Fast and Furious 7, the Warcraft movie, Blade Runner 2049, Thor Ragnarok, Last Jedi. You did some stuff on Game of Thrones, Siren, Shadowhunters, C, which was a fantastic series. That's a really interesting one. And Jupiter's Legacy, which I really enjoyed, but apparently nobody else did. This is, I mean, any particular things on some of the other projects that you worked on that really stand out for you?
Yeah, I think outside of the big names of some of the project that I was lucky to be part of, I think when I had the best time, it was probably because the client, the producer, or the director, or the team that I was in was special. I have like really, really awesome experiences working with Denis Villeneuve on many of his movies. Like I worked like in the early days, like on Incendie. I worked on The Enemy. I worked on, and then later on Blade Runner. And I love the connection and the way he treats people, the way he carries his vision. And some other projects, even like some movies or TV shows that, sometimes you invest a lot on our side on visual effects. And unfortunately, some of these projects, they don't have a very good audience success. But, if the movie is not good, or the story is not good, or for whatever reason, it's not really our fault, but, it's less exciting. And that your show that you invested like a year of your life and the audience hates it. And it's like, awesome. But sometimes smaller shows, we had so much fun because, I don't know, the team was great. Client was fun to work with, as opposed sometimes it's the opposite, some small shows and the client is really, really hard to work with. And so each time it's a new relationship.
Yeah. So Umbrella Academy now done. I mean, I know you won't be able to talk about stuff that hasn't been announced yet. Have you got anything coming up that you can mention? I know you did. You do the Harold and the Purple Crayon, which I think has just been released.
Yeah. I think it wasn't my first experience with kids show or like family and kids shows. I remember I worked a long time ago on a Talking Animals show. Racing Stripes or something like that. But it was fun. It was really, really fun. It's in these type of movies, the creativity is like, you can do whatever you want. It's like, so it was nice. And yes, I'm busy right now on other stuff. Of course, I cannot talk about. Yes. There's been a slowdown, to be honest, in this industry. No surprise for after the COVID, after the strikes, there has been a very, very big hit, but it's picking up in places, not everywhere, fortunately for some of my colleagues and friends all over the world in this industry. But yeah, we're busy, fortunate to be busy. And I hope we'll be able to announce new releases soon.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so. It's been rough post-COVID, post-strikes. I know it's been difficult across the industry for everybody behind the scenes, particularly. And I know there's a lot of people, particularly in LA and places like that have been struggling because the industry just hasn't bounced back to the level that it was. It's an odd situation with the FX people because, I mean, there were stories a few years ago of the fact they were being run ragged and they just weren't giving you enough time to churn through stuff as well. And to go from that to this.
It's really like the other side of the wave, basically. We are having so much work and producing so much content, even like too fast in a way, like we couldn't find enough people to work. And after that, it's been like quite the opposite. And even studios are we are at the very, very end of the food chain, right? But even people in production, like people on set, they've been out of work for so long, and then they will hope that it will pick up. Like, okay, we're ready now that the strikes are over. I'm going to work next week. It's still no. It's like studios are taking their sweet time to produce new shows. They don't want to produce too much content. Yeah, they realize it's not necessarily too much content that will bring people to their networks, but quality content, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, you're finding that particularly with networks, those sort of, 22, 24 episode runs of the big US TV shows, with apart from the few procedurals, a lot of that has started to get cut down to 10, 15, 18 episodes. So, they're all getting cut back as well. And then the streamers are just as standard tends to do 8, 10 episode or even 6 episode runs these days. So
like our last season of Umbrella was 6 episodes instead of 10.
Yeah, I mean, it could possibly have done with a couple more episodes of that, but I mean, I think they wrapped it up well in the time that they had to do it. So, So just before we go, a couple of final questions for you, and I ask these same things to everybody, so they're exactly the same. So first question is, what TV shows are you watching at the moment?
Oh, I had a lot of backlog. So I just finished Peaky Blinders.
Ah, yes.
And I loved it.
They're shooting the movie of that literally down the road from me, so...
Oh yeah, around Birmingham. So
because I'm just north of Birmingham. So he built an entire studio just to. Well, I mean, he's filming other stuff there, but he built a studio basically to and Peaky Blinders is one of the things that they're filming there. So that's awesome. And if you had the opportunity to work on any TV series, can be something that's already been made, so something from the past, something present day, or some sort of future genre that maybe you haven't worked in previously. What would it be?
A good sequel or good prequel of Aliens, maybe?
Well, I mean, the new Romulus one has been getting okay reviews. I mean, I've not seen it, so I can't judge for myself. But I think it's on about 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, something like that. It's not bad. It's better than some of the other films that are out at the moment. Like the Crow movie, which is absolutely panned, and the Borderlands film. But apart from that would be good. I mean, there is the TV series coming up as well, of course, which I don't know who's working on the FX for that, but there's that. So that's a good choice. I shall let you get back to your day. Thank you for spending some time to chat with me. It's been lovely.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we can talk again at some point on one of your future projects.
Hope so. Thank you so much.
Thank you.